You really thought it was over, didn't you? After reaching 150 plus books mentioned in this list, you thought there's no way he's gonna pull more out. How many more disturbing books could there possibly be? Well, if doing this series has taught me anything, it is that the fountain from which disturbing literature sprouts is endlessly plentiful, and it doesn't seem like it's gonna go dry anytime soon. So, might as well take full advantage of it, and let's go again. We're gonna go through a whole bunch of more disturbing books, so buckle up. Oh, and as an added measure of precaution, if things get too disturbing, please do avert your gaze and turn to look at the cute sloth over there. I don't know if it'll fix anything, but she's pretty cute, isn't she? Hello, and welcome to part 8 of this most disturbing book series. My name is Juan, and yes, we've reached part 8 now. As I said, it really doesn't seem like we're going to run out of disturbing titles to go through. There's a whole bunch of titles that I have to go through that you, my lovely viewers, have suggested as part of this vast compendium of unsavory literature that we have going here. And I know it's been a while, so there's a lot to catch up on. Not only on all of the new suggestions that have been made since I made part 6, because part 7 was a special in which I only included suggestions by booktubers, but since I made part 6, which was back in October, there's been a whole bunch of titles suggested since then. And also back when I made part 6 in October, I did miss a couple that I was able to fish out this time, that I was doing a meticulous survey of all of the comments on each one of the most disturbing books installments. So I think this will bring us up to date. There is 30 plus books that you all have suggested since last time. And of course, as always, as is always the format for these installments, after I go through the viewer suggestions, I'm going to give you 5 of my own. And I am always super delighted to sit down and record these videos. They are truly my favorite to make out of all of them, just because it's such a fascinating topic to me. I am extremely passionate about it, and just the fact that I've opened up this space where everybody just feels so comfortable and excited about talking about books that are seldom ever given any platform or any real consideration beyond that's too fucked up, or nobody wants to read that's gross. So I really feel like we've built something special here. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a community or something akin to an insane asylum, who knows, but we're all happy here to talk about the same kinds of unsavory things, and I am delighted that I get to be sort of the master of ceremonies of sorts. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get through all the comments full of wonderfully bizarre and disgusting and off-putting suggestions. And I'll give my 2 cents on the ones that I've read or that I've heard of, but there are more than a few that I've never heard anything about. So thankfully, some of these comments, you all did the work for me, and you wrote pretty compelling descriptions of these titles, but there will be some that I just will probably have nothing to say about because I haven't read them. So yeah, let's go ahead and get through that. I'm going to try to get through it as quickly as possible. I always say that, and these videos always end up being an hour, sometimes even longer than an hour, but surprisingly, you all don't seem to mind that. And I am eternally grateful for that, because I really feel like my crazed ramblings have truly found a beautiful, attentive audience. So anyway, let's go. Let's get through these. Let's see what you all came up with this time. All right, so the first comment that I was able to fish out was Touche Tower. And they say, "This guy is adorable." Ooh, me? How dare you? I am the face of horror. I am the face of monstrosity. How dare you say that? No, but thank you. That's very kind of you. You didn't like Tampa. right? So you probably don't want to read the book Fürchtgebiet. I don't know. I looked it up. It's been translated into English as Wetlands. Don't know if it was ever translated to English. Well, I just said that, yeah, it was. I just confirmed. It was a pretty disturbing book, too. I have heard of this book. There was a film adaptation, which is said to be one of the most disgusting things that has ever been put in cinema. I'm doubtful of that, but the book does sound pretty gross. I think it involves a lot of mishaps down in the female genitalia, lots of growths and gashes and pus and secretions, things of that nature. I feel like this would be a more suited entry for my most disgusting books installments. But you know, disgusting, disturbing, they sort of go hand in hand. But there you go. Wetlands or Fürchtgebiet or whatever. Yeah, I would be curious to read that and see just how it is to read about something like that in novel length. You know, how much can they cram in there? No pun intended. All right, next up from Random Retro Pie. Dude, you need to read The Bighead by Edward Lee. After you read that, everything seems far less intense. You could also check out my book, Scratch, by Thomas W. Brown. So a plug for a disturbing book of his own. Interesting. So Scratch by Thomas W. Brown. I'll be sure to shout that out up here on the screen. You know, for anybody that's interested. I didn't look into it, so I feel bad that I didn't even look it up. But thank you for your suggestions. And of course, as faithful followers of the channel will know, I have read The Bighead, and I made an entire video review about it. And you will know that, yes, it is one of the most violent things that I have read. One of the most, grotesquely graphic and relentless things and that I have ever read. But it didn't really strike the disturbing chord with me quite as the rest of the titles that we covered in this list. I feel like the other titles have more of an insidious nature to them, where they sort of dig into, certain sensitive nerves, something like that. But this is just full-on display of debauchery and depravity and gore. Those things don't really tend to disturb me, but they do entertain me. And as I said in my review, this was pretty funny. It was just Edward Lee's like this weird little goofball that you're just like, he's having a good time writing about all this. And he makes you have a good time with him. He really, I will say the positive about him, he really seems to be an author that is wholly devoted to warming you up to the kind of bizarre displays that he's going to lay out in his books. And I warmed up to it, and I really did kind of enjoy it in a weird way. But yeah, though I have reviewed it, it hadn't been formally introduced into this disturbing books list. So now let's welcome The Bighead as a viewer suggestion. All right, up next from John Smith. I don't know if it's been recommended before, but check out Final Truth by Donald Henry Pee-wee Gaskins. It's the autobiography of a serial killer, 90% of which is almost certainly bullshit, but Pee-wee did have a turn of phrase or two. Imagine a psychopathic Forrest Gump. I had never heard of this book, but I mean, that description, how could you not be interested? A psychopathic Forrest Gump kind of reminds me of something that I do know, which is Carl Panzram, the Journal of a Serial Killer, which is also not an autobiography, but there's elements of it that were composed from the killer's own entries. Gates of Janus by Ian Brady, which is also, an analysis of serial killers from the mouth of a serial killer himself. There seems to be a lot of nonfiction of this kind, a lot of literature produced by, the monsters that are usually the subject of disturbing literature, not the authors. But there's always these peculiar little blips in literature where something like this comes up, and they do seem interesting. I mean, I'm not a fan of true crime, so they're kind of difficult for me to get into, but might give it a chance if I ever come across it. Who knows? But yeah, thank you so much for your suggestion. It is most definitely deserving of a mention here on this list. All right, up next from Connor Morrison. Nice video. Thank you so much. Only just got back into reading in earnest. I am not very well read, but I thought The Resurrectionist by Rath James White was downright evil in a good but uncomfortable way. So, again, for those of you who follow the channel, you will know that I did read The Resurrectionist by Rath James White. That it was my pick for my sadly now defunct Vision of the Month book club back in November, I think. November of last year. So I read it. I wasn't really a fan. There's something about these extreme horror books that they just don't gel with me. And I don't know what it is, because so many other people seem to really delight in it. And you would think, me as somebody who is a fan of, more disturbing subject matter, you would think that it would resonate with me as well. But there's a disconnect there. It's very shoddily written in some points. There's infamously this entire chapter or two dedicated to the central couple of the story going to Vegas, and then just describing their night in Vegas, and then all the tension, all the eeriness, all the dark brooding psychology is just deflated, and then try to jump back into it, but it's well, you kind of killed the mood already, buddy. But no, it wasn't all entirely bad. And I will say there was a scene in here that involved the cutting off of a nose and then a sexual act with the orifice. Or cutting out an eyeball, I think, and a nose. I don't remember it. So the details don't really matter, do they? But I will say, when I read that, I was like, oh, that is pretty fucking gross. So there you go. If a book makes me say that, it has to have some merit to it, doesn't it? But yeah, there you go. The Resurrectionist. And also, curiously enough, I noticed I could have sworn I had already mentioned that in this series, but I went back and I checked, and no. So I'm happy to welcome it into the Most Disturbing Books compendium. I do think it is deserving of a spot here. All right, up next from Lee Davis, Time's Arrow by Martin Amis, about a man's doppelganger living his life backwards to its horrifying and shocking conclusion. What a ride. It sounds like quite a ride indeed. I've never heard of this book. I don't know anything about it or about the author. It seems like some weird, disturbing version of what's that one Fitzgerald story? The Benjamin Button scenario. I would be curious to check that out. It does sound pretty cool, but yeah, don't know anything about it, sadly. But thank you. Thank you so much for putting it in my radar. Very happy. Up next from Chava. She says, have you read Perfume by Patrick Süskind? I read it on a whim because I like the cover. It's really eerie. If you start it, stick with it. Yes, indeed, I have read Perfume. This is actually one of the first disturbing books that I ever read back in high school. This is not the same copy that I read back then, but I don't remember it being disturbing per se. I certainly picked it up because I heard that it was. But I just remember it being this very beautifully composed novel about very unsavory subject matter, and also kind of gross in some ways. But I don't remember it really standing out to me and really shocking or making me uncomfortable in the way that other things I read back then did, like Cows or The Girl Next Door or Story of the Eye. But I have heard from various other people who have described this as a disturbing book. So definitely I do think it belongs in here. And maybe I should give it a reread and see what it's all about. I mean, it's been, over 10 years now since I read it. Definitely, I'll have to revisit this one. Thank you for reminding me that I need to do that. And of course, thank you for the suggestion. It is very much appreciated. Thank you. Thank you so much for your comment. All right, up next from Vinci Boy. Hey, if you liked Now You're One of Us, which was Asano, which was from the second part of this series, I think you'd really enjoy The Vegetarian by Han Kang. This one is in Japanese. I believe it is Korean. But it explores similar ideas of fucked up marriage and the effects a society with ridiculously high expectations can have on someone. Thanks so much, Vinci Boy, for your suggestion, for your comment, and for watching, of course. Yeah, I have heard of this book. I believe the now inactive booktube channel, Coding Snaps, which was headed by a good friend of mine, Gio, talked about this book months and months ago. I believe it is about a woman who decides to go vegetarian, and something like, I think in South Korea it's kind of a taboo, or it's kind of a looked down upon to go this dietary route, something like that, just because meat is such an important part of the diet. I might be completely wrong about that, but that's what I seem to recall about it. But I don't know where the disturbing angle comes from, but I'm definitely curious. I mean, especially with that comparison to Asano, something a little more quiet, a little more subdued, but it escalates and also has social commentary wrapped into it. I'm down to check it out. So thank you again, Vinci Boy, for your comment. All right, up next from CC Real 64. An old French transgressive classic is the anonymous The Story of O. Won't go into it here in case you haven't read it. Thank you so much, CC Real 64, for your comment and for your entry. I have read this, and I read that I think also in high school. I think you're starting to pick up on the fact that I read a lot of fucked up books back in high school. That's where my fascination for this kind of literature was really awakened. And yes, it is an erotic novel, full of all kinds of taboo subject matter, like forced sex and torture, and I think the more disturbing angle to the story is that the author was writing it as a series of sexual fantasies that were meant to titillate her partner, who was really into this kind of stuff, who was also really into the Marquis de Sade. I mean, what a red flag of a guy. But yes, I have read that. What can one say about pornography of that kind? It's delightfully fucked up. That's what I think. All right, now next up from Copal 2. Couple I'd recommend, and there's indeed a couple left here. Let's try to get through them. Lullaby for Little Criminals, a coming-of-age book involving abandonment, drugs, poverty, and underage prostitution. I generally don't really like first-person narratives, especially as remembrances, but this is written in one of the most impactful voices in prose I've ever read. It is a mix of reflection, but still with the voice of the child, so matter of fact. And then a quote, "Childhood is the most valuable thing that's taken away from you in life, if you think about it." Or another quote, "If you want to get a child to love you, then you should just go hide in the closet for 3 or 4 hours. They get down on their knees and pray for you to return. That child will turn you into God. Lonely children probably wrote the Bible." Those samples sound beautiful. This sounds like it would be right up my alley. I've never heard of this book, so I have nothing to add, but you've done a fantastic job of selling the book to me and of describing its qualities. And then after that, Devil All the Time. And this one is, I think, by Donald Ray Pollock. There we go. This is a more popular book, and there's plenty of reviews of it, but in short, it's 3 stories that weave together at the end of a father and son, where the father has violent PTSD from World War II, and a sort of fanatic religious belief where sacrifices at the prayer log in the woods will get God to save his dying wife. A preacher who abuses young girls, and a sexual serial killer couple where he takes photos of men having sex with his wife under gunpoint before he kills them. The voice is the disturbing oppressiveness of inevitability. Quote, "Unless he had whiskey running through his veins, Willard came to the clearing every morning and evening to talk to God. Arvin didn't know which was worse, the drinking or the prayer. As far back as he could remember, it seemed that his father had fought the devil all the time." So I did read another Donald Ray Pollock novel, which was The Heavenly Table, and I liked it. I feel like people enjoy his stuff more than I did, or at least with that one book. I don't know if The Heavenly Table is like his weakest work, but this certainly sounds compelling, and it wasn't bad. I liked it. I just didn't love it like I thought it would. So I'm totally down to give another one of his books a try, especially this one. This one sounds quite incredible. So I probably will end up reading that. But Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Colpul2, for such a beautifully detailed comment full of quotations. I really appreciate the use of quotations to kind of sell me on the style and rhythm of the novel. So I'll definitely be checking both of those out eventually. I feel they sound incredible. But yeah, thank you so much for such a lovely comment. I really appreciate it. All right, moving on to Romeo. Romeo is now a homie, but apparently this was one of his first comments here on my channel 5 months ago. Hi, recently found your channel and I'm a big fan. Thank you so much, Romeo. Glad to see Joyce Carol Oates made the list. That was Zombie was one of my entries into the list. Another book by them that disturbed me greatly is Daddy Love. I couldn't stop thinking about the book for weeks after reading it. That is a Joyce Carol Oates that I have not even heard of before. But I already love Joyce Carol Oates as a writer, so I'll probably want to check that out. And I don't know anything about it, but Romeo, if you say it's disturbing, then let's go ahead and reel it in. Thank you so much for your comment, for your entry. I really appreciate it. All right, next up from Jessica Gonzalo. Love your videos. Thank you so much. The Butterfly Garden is a book I've read a long time ago and still find disturbing indeed. I love many books you recommended and will be adding lots to my read list. I'm very happy to hear that. Thanks so much for watching. I'm so happy that you're enjoying the the debauchery around here. And then they say, have you read La Bête, Humaine by Zola? That was Émile Zola. A classic, but makes me feel very uneasy. Thank you so much for your kind words and for your suggestion. I have obtained a copy of La Bête Humaine by Émile Zola, and I have not read it. I can't tell you what it's about. I haven't read it yet. I haven't even really looked into it, but I think I saw it somewhere like up for grabs. I don't remember where. I think it was like a garage sale or something, and I thought, okay, I've heard of that from this comment, so it is now in my possession. I'll probably end up reading it eventually, most likely. I mean, if it's a disturbing book, hell yeah. So it is now in my possession. So thank you so much, Jessica, again, for your comment. I really appreciate it. All right, next up from Melody Melancholy. Dude, I just found your channel today. Well, this was a month ago, but they found it on that day. Finally, I have my extreme horror fix. So happy that you've chanced upon this world. Thank you so much for watching. I was curious if you've heard/read No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai and or Goodnight Punpun by Inio Asano. I read the manga adaptation of No Longer Human and finished Punpun a few years ago. Both left me incredibly depressed post-read. Well, of course, thank you so much for your comment and your entries. Melody Melancholy. I have read No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai. I liked it. It's kind of... I think that there's a tradition that is sort of jump-started around sort of more interior and unbrooding Japanese literature. But this is highly influential. I enjoyed it all right. I just kind of felt like the subject matter that it explores has been explored to a broader and more impactful extent in other books that I have read. But of course, I think historically speaking, in the chronology of literature of this kind, I do think that this is very important. So yes, I have read it, and no, I didn't hate it or anything like that. I really enjoyed it. And then Goodnight Punpun, I also have read. It hadn't been introduced into this master list of disturbing works, but it is plenty disturbing. I do have a review of it up on my channel for anybody that might be interested. Quite a ride. Very bizarre, very weird, sort of relentlessly mean-spirited and depressing, to a fault, in my opinion, at certain points. But overall, I mean, I think it does what it sets out to do, which is make you uncomfortable and make you feel really shitty. So if you want that, there you go. But again, thank you so much for your comment. Up next from Harar. I almost feel bad suggesting this because I really don't think people find it disturbing, and as someone who's read a lot of the books you've pointed out, I can agree it's not exactly on the same level, but one of my favorite books of all time is Flowers for Algernon. My mother was a special education teacher and thought it was a very important book, so she gave it to me when I was 10 or 11. I was not prepared to feel the way I did by the end. I've reread it a few times since then, and it still makes my chest knot up when I get to it. I understand that the implications of the books are hopeful to some, but it still makes me sad. Thank you so much for such a beautiful comment, sort of like explaining your personal relationship to this book, which is what I feel tempers a lot of what we might find disturbing. And as I say, you know, most people might not be inclined to find this disturbing, but I know I certainly have read books that I feel no one else but me probably found disturbing, but there's always some kind of resonance, some pushing of a nerve that really sets off this feeling of unease and bleakness and so forth. I've never read Flowers for Algernon. I think I must have read like kind of like an abridged version of it in middle school, because I do remember coming across it in the whole like mouse experiment thing. So at the very least, I am aware of it, and maybe I should read that. I mean, it seems like a classic, and I always kind of feel left out when I haven't read such a title that everybody talks about. But you know, disturbing in a personal and muted sense, I think absolutely. I think at this point we've proven those kinds of titles also belong on this list. So, of course, I welcome in Flowers for Algernon. Thank you so much for such a lovely comment. I really appreciate it. All right, up next from No Roll Videolog. Joyce Carol Oates' short tale, Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? Really creeped me out. Bone-chilling, mundane, cold portrayal of a sexual abuse case where the perpetrator makes it seem like a courtship. I have read this tale by Joyce Carol Oates. Another Joyce Carol Oates entry in the same video. Joyce Carol Oates wrote a lot of fucked up shit, and I feel like she's not fully recognized for that aspect to her writing, but she does have this way of exploring things that feel really, I don't know, sort of ostracized within ourselves, and really gets at those nerves. And I think her writing is fantastic. Definitely not for everybody. I have heard some people even hate her, and I guess I can understand, but couldn't be me. I love her writing, and this story in particular is indeed very very off-putting for the reasons described in this comment. This is a short story collection. Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? Is the story in here, but yes, absolutely. The more Joyce Carol Oates we can welcome in to this master list, the better. So thank you so much for your comment. All right, up next from Lavender Mystic. Yay, I love this series. I'm binging on some of your videos today, trying to catch up. Thank you so much. Congratulations on getting ads. This was back when we got monetized. That's hilarious. Thank you. Yes, we're making millions. No. Okay. I recommend Vita Nostra by the Dyachenkos. The psychological tension in the book, the harrowing mental abuse that the main character has to go through is horrific and will keep you glued to it. I want to make this one thing clear because this comparison annoys me to no end. This is not a dark Harry Potter. I don't care that a writer said that. It's highly inarticulate, misleading, and personally I think it's an insult to the authors. Now, metaphysical, check. Dark, check. Somewhat disturbing, check. But most of all, this is a little literary gem. I would even say it's its own genre. The ending left me flabbergasted. The premise is a girl gets recruited against her will by a mysterious stranger to the Institute of Special Technologies. If she refuses to attend, her family pays the price. We really don't find out what the school really teaches until later in the book. I don't want to spoil it, so I'll stop here, but you won't forget Sasha Samokina's trials for a long time. I had never even heard of this book. You've done a fantastic job of giving just enough of a summary to interest without spoiling it, and those threats of darkness that you described. I'm in for that. And it sounds kind of like a darkly fantastical work of some kind, not fully fantasy, but maybe something that'll interest me, because these kinds of more fantastic works I tend to be off-put by, but this one sounds great. So I'm definitely interested, and of course very happy to welcome it into this series. So thank you so much for such a lovely detailed comment. I really love the comments where you all just basically do the job for me. Because sometimes, if you had just mentioned the book, I would have nothing to say about it. But thank you for offering me and the audience very valuable insight into what this book is about, and I'll definitely be keeping it in my radar. So Thank you. All right, up next from Alger Landau. Alger, a wonderful friend of the show. Really appreciated entity around here. He says, as freaking always, your videos make so perfectly my meal times and before bedtime. So great to see so many recommendations. Like you said, it's so good to keep discovering literature. I always want to recommend books to you, but you are so far ahead. Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure you've caught up here. That I see it as a hopeless case. You know so much, my friend. That's why you're a perfect refuge for many of us. Of the few things I can recommend, I'm sure you already checked out. Well, thank you so much for such kind words. I mean, you always say so many nice things about me that I feel undeserving of, but I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alger. Apple and Knife by Intan Paramaditha. Short stories between horror myth, fairy tales, and complete realism about the reality of the female body in today's world. The author could be one of the great voices of the disturbing that speak for women in a deeply honest way. A perfect example is the short story Blood. I singled that out as one of the finest written stories I've ever encountered. A now classic in my life. I've never heard this collection. Disturbing short stories is something, and one of my interests is going to be a short story collection, so that's definitely something I'm more interested in reeling into this discussion. I feel like something short, kind of like a vignette or a very compressed sort of happening can be so powerfully disquieting by the carefully curated details it brings in and what it leaves out. Definitely a fascinating format that really, really adds a kind of fecundity to uncertainty and terror. So very interested in that. And then the next suggestion is The Secret of Ventriloquism by John Paget. Would it sound far-fetched to say that a book can be evil on its own? Well, by the time I finished reading this Wonder of the Insane, I felt that this book was capable of transforming you to evil in an authentic way. It's that good. A bunch of short stories on wickedness and possession like you've never read before. A jewel among jewels. I've read a book of short story by Horacio Castellanos Moya, and he's damn good. I hope I get to dive into senselessness, because that was one of my previous entries. I'm an obsessive fan of Russian literature, and definitely Solzhenitsyn is an absolute feast for me. Another previous entry. I adore his work, not the person. He became so messianic after his Nobel Prize. I did not know that, but you know what? That makes me admire him even more. Thanks again for an amazing video, mate. Take good care and a huge hug. Can't wait for more visions. Thank you so much, Alger, sincerely, for everything. And as far as the Secret of Ventriloquism, I have read that since. This was really, really creepy. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed how it starts off. This kind of call for a meditation before it delves you into all the disquieting, weird terror within the pages. That this is indeed a very good and yes, disturbing short story collection that I am happy to welcome into the compendium. So thank you so much for that. And lo and behold, I skipped a huge chunk of his comment where he made another suggestion. My apologies. I knew there were three. I don't know why I skipped over this one, but the other one was Pen Pal by Dathan Auerbach, who what started as a creepypasta published on the internet in parts was turned into one of the creepiest novels I've ever read, a true experience between anxiety and longing, and expertly handled atmosphere of childhood, loss, and death, and an ending so devastated that will leave you remembering your own past and present in a nostalgic way. Very, very beautifully succinct way of putting the book. I have read it, and I actually... Curiously enough, I followed this when it was a creepypasta on the Snow Sleep subreddit. So this has been part of my disturbing ecosystem for a while now. Disturbing, maybe not so much for me, but I mean definitely very forlorn and wistful, and there's always something uneasy about stories about childhood. I don't know if that's just me and my own fucked up childhood, but that is what it is. Anyway, that gets me up to speed with Alger. My apologies for skipping over that first part of the comment. All right, up next from Lee F. 2 suggestions for your next video. Here we go. Let's go. First one, The Death of Bunny Monroe by Nick Cave. He has the same Nick Cave as in The Bad Seeds frontman. The book is just a strange, sexually disconcerting one with sexual arousal occurring at really horrid times, and is basically written as an exploration of an extremely corrupt, narcissistic sex addict. sprinkled with typically dark humor that Nick included in his music. I have not read this one. I have read a Nick Cave book, so I do believe you that he's a writer, because I read And the S of the Angel. So I do think he is a very phenomenal writer of like grotesquerie and sort of these weirdly gothic undertones to his tales. I do enjoy his writing a lot, so I would definitely be willing to read another one by him. And then the second one is History of a Drowning Boy, the autobiography of serial killer Dennis Nielsen. This is horrific as it's all real and all written by Nielsen whilst in prison. He discusses his horrid crimes in detail as well as what led him to do what he did. Possibly not for you, as he does discuss child sexual abuse, but for anyone who can handle such things and is intrigued by the psychology of murderers, check it out. Brilliant videos, by the way. Thank you so much, Lee F, for your kind words and your wonderfully expressed suggestions. Again, another instance of literature composed by the monster himself. Which is an endlessly fascinating topic to me. Who knows? Maybe I'll check it out if I can find a copy of it. That sounds just about as fucked up as it probably is. So thank you so much for your comment. All right, up next from Mercury Rising. I read a book one time in middle school called Cry Silent Tears by Joe Peters. Definitely shouldn't have read it that young, and admittedly I don't remember much about it, but I do remember middle school me crying her eyes out. Cry Silent Tears. I don't know anything about it. You left it vague enough that I'm interested. I'll have to look into it, but there it is. Another one for the list. If it made middle school you cry her eyes out, I'm game for it. I do think that, the most impactful things that fester in our mind forever are things that we witness when we are more innocent. So, yeah, thank you so much for your comment and for your suggestion. All right, up next from Ninja Chugs. This comment is amazing. There's this obscure writer named Stephen King out there that writes the most disturbing books ever made. Literally. I'd be shocked if you'd ever heard of him. Anyway, I recommend It and The Shining by said author. Both books have had a couple of film adaptations and they're pretty fucked up. No shame if you haven't heard of Stephen King or any of his work. They're pretty damn obscure. I think I may have heard something about you can only find it like on PDF on like an Onion site, and you have to get like the Tor browser and the VPN and all that. I'll have to explore the dark web to see if I can find anything about this King dude. But I know, of course, your this entry is humorous, but I do think that Stephen King deserves a spot in this list because he really is that kind of gateway figure into the more disturbing, the more disquieting and darker fiction out there. I mean, he certainly was that stepping stone for me. As we all know, It has a very infamous scene in it that I think justifies its presence just because of how bizarre this is really, as you can tell, where he just fucking threw everything at the wall and then just swept it into the book whether it's stuck or not. So there's some stuff in there. It's a book about childhood. Again, childhood sometimes feels very vulnerable and off-putting in the way that it's treated in fiction. And this one too, The Shining. This is the first book by Stephen King that I ever read. And it certainly introduced me to this new mode of literature where I went, oh my God, there's this entire world of horrors that I must investigate now. So yeah, I think Stephen King is definitely the first step for a lot of people. And I think his books do stand out as being incredibly disturbing for a lot of primarily younger readers or readers who are not so used to reading these kinds of darker works. So I think I say he definitely belongs in here. I know your comment, you were being facetious, but what the hell? Stephen King belongs in here. God damn it. And curiously enough, the next comment, it also includes a Stephen King title in it. So why not? This one is from Blue Velvet Valentina. I would say Stephen King's Rage is not by 2021 standards disturbing. This comment is from 2021. You can see how behind I've been on this. But if you think when it was written, it was after what happened in Dallas in the 50s and the I Don't Like Mondays incident. It almost felt like his book was a warning. So, yeah, I mean, infamously, you can really only find it in a compilement of the Bachman books now, because an individual copy of it is extremely rare and extremely expensive to come across. But yeah, Rage, the reason it's so rare is because it was Stephen King demanded that it be put out of print because of its sort of maybe tenuous but still present connections to a lot of like real life cases of gun violence in schools, and of course by the way that violence of that nature has exploded, it's kind of become even disgustingly quotidian in American life, just sort of disgustingly commonplace. I think that his work was incredibly prophetic in predicting, the nature of violence amongst youth and how that would come to fester and worsen. And yeah, a very dark subject matter, but I think important. And most definitely, if I were to put any book of Stephen King's into this list, it would definitely be that one. And then the second suggestion was Update, because I forgot. It's a biography, but Child Star by Shirley Temple is also disturbing, especially when you put down the book and see Child Star scandals with Nickelodeon, Disney, and on social media platforms. This seems like another prophetic kind of work. Yeah, the world of child stardom is incredibly fucked up. I mean, there's been stories that I've followed for like, the two Coreys from the 80s and Amanda Bynes, and just really leaves a bad taste in your mouth. Like the lengths to which we're willing to go to sort of perpetuate a kind of entertainment that really shouldn't exist. I don't know. It's really fucked up. And I would definitely be interested in reading some nonfiction about that. So, but Blue Velvet Valentina, thank you so much for your comment, for your entries. Really, really appreciate it. All right, next up from Zeus B. I just found your channel a few days ago and I completely fell in love. Let's get married. I listen to you while working and it's a real pleasure. Keep up the great work. Thank you so much. In terms of my takes on disturbing books, I have two titles that come up to my mind. The Vegetarian by Han Kang. We already discussed that one. But let's see what Zeusby has to say about it. It has this eerie, uncomfortable vibe. Strange story of a woman who, because of violent, bloody dreams, stops eating meat. I had this book in my head weeks after I read this. Also, the way it's written made it even more interesting. Okay. And then the other one. One of Us by Asne Serstad. Pretty sure I mispronounced that. Nonfiction about Anders Bruick, who in July of 2011 murdered 69 children/teens in a summer camp on Utoya Island and 8+ adults after a bomb attack in Oslo. Serstad made this gargantuan amount of work in portraying Breivik and what led to this massacre. I literally had to take breaks while reading. Incredibly good book. Wishing you all best. Take care. Thank you so much, Susby, for your wonderful, very kind words, for your wonderful comment, and for that fucking bombshell of a suggestion. I had never heard of that case. Jesus Christ, that sounds horrifying. Alright, so my first entry into this 8th part of the Most Disturbing Books is a short story collection. As I mentioned before, I was going to include one of those in this video. And this one is Going to Meet the Man by James Baldwin, which was first published in 1965. James Baldwin, of course, an incredibly important figure in African-American literature and just literature in general. Because of his treatment of the level of unrest that really sort of plagued the human condition, especially in a racial sense. Of course, these deep explorations of the turbid sort of psychology that plagues social dynamics of this kind, and he really did such a fantastic job at showing, that level of unease, of unrest, of the way that things are codified in a way that is not at peace. There's eternal conflict, internal and external, and if there is such a thing that kind of feels like a resolution, he understands and he lets us know that resolution is actually more of a compromise. And what I mean by that is that, this is a short story collection that is highly involved in showing all manner of tensions, black and white people, closeted homosexuality, in a way, that shows that there's no real peace to be found here. There's more of like a muted sense of compromise, of resignation. And I think that's what he did so well, is that he never really set out to moralize or appease our thoughts with kinds of false gestures towards something that would feel like peace, and instead say, look, here's the unrest, everything is volatile, nothing is falling quite into place, it's just eternal restlessness, and make of that what you will. And of course, that in and of itself is disturbing enough in its own right. But there is one story in here that I particularly want to cover, and that is the eponymous short story, Going to Meet the Man. Now, this story is about a white police officer who it sets us up in a scene in his bedroom when he's trying to get intimate with his wife, but he finds that he cannot get an erection. And then upon pondering his own life back into childhood, into his service in the police force, we learned that there was a key moment in his childhood that sort of cemented the way that the power structure, and as it bleeds into his sexual prowess and his sexual impotence, and it had to do with the lynching that he witnessed when he was a kid, and he witnessed a crowd of white civilians hang and kill and burn this African American man, and his gaze, the policeman's gaze as a child, fixed on the black man's genitalia. And that sort of elevation of his own personal power trip of being able to tower over this figure that laid maimed and murdered before his eyes, and how that kind of superiority complex is its own psychological mess, that really sort of festers and rots in the mind. I think James Baldwin explores that in such an unflinching, uncompromised way. And it is just so unbelievably unsavory, the subject matter that he's exploring, but also feels so important to peek into the sinister underbelly of the psychology of the way that America is codified, in a way that really shows, look, here is the monstrosity. Here is what's really going on in these sort of seemingly quotidian and everyday social interactions. There is always something monstrous, something that looms over the mind in a really momentous and disconcerting way. And of course, we have so much of the transgressive imagery here, the burning dead meat, the way that the death is suffused with eroticism. It's a scene in a bedroom, and then we're taking to a scene of a lynching, and then those two sort of converge, the wires sort of merge in the mind of this white character, and really sort of shows this disquieting realization that James Baldwin stumbles into, in that perversity, the nature of it, is just kind of a way of coping, of making sense of the depraved and monstrous world around you. Depravity, perversity as a coping mechanism, is a kind of witnessing the way that humanity sort of integrates into perversity, the origin of it, and how this integration works in every single facet of our lives, from the intimate to the broader social sphere. It is just such a brilliant dismantling and recapitulation of American history, all within the encapsulation of a bedroom. And of a horrific scene from childhood, which of course owes a lot to sort of more psychoanalytical leanings, but it is incredibly disconcerting, just the way that James Baldwin really frays and tears apart at things that already kind of feel vulnerable, and that they leave a really bad taste in our mouth. James Baldwin always sort of dares to go there, and he goes there with a rage, with an outrage, with a boldness that is not easy to shake off. And I think that James Baldwin is never really mentioned in lists of this kind, disturbing books lists. Lists of that kind are usually reserved for like horror or things that are more straightforward, creepy and upsetting. But the level of upset that is in James Baldwin's book, I think, absolutely merits him being included on here. At least I think so. And going to meet the man, you're not going to see a more transgressive, a more monstrous, a more revolting work of his than you will here. All right, up next is the second work by this author that I am including on this list, by the amazing Elfriede Jelinek. And this time I'm going to be talking about Wonderful, Wonderful Times. A very deceptive title. First published in the year 1980. Now this is of course set in Austria, as with most of Jelinek's work. And it concerns this gang of teenagers who are going about, the latter half of the 20th century, well after war has torn the recesses of this country, of this city, of this culture. And something that I find so compelling about Jelinek's work, especially because she sets it in this, her home nation, is that, it is wholly concerned with a culture, a nation where, by all intents and purposes, the resolution of all the monstrosity that took place during World War II seems to already have come to a resolution. But Jelinek is really interested in exploring the leftover corners in which the monstrous legacy of that conflict still festers and rots, and the way they're kind of more muted, kind of harder to scratch at, kind of harder to get across, but they're still there. And she is interested in opening up those wounds once more, and showing the scabbing that has taken place, and how that scabbing can be as grotesque as the wounds that have produced it. We follow this gang of teenagers who are basically just going around performing all manner of atrocities, something akin to some like A Clockwork Orange, for example. And the style with which Jelinek approaches it's just kind of interesting that it's a deeply psychological novel where we hardly get a good grasp on what is actually happening in the physical world, because everything is riddled by the internal thoughts of these teenagers, and the kind of effect that has, that is, it produces this severance between mind and body, where it feels like the psychology of these characters is wholly detached from all the monstrosity that they are enacting on other people, killing animals, beating up and robbing homeless people, all manner of things, hurting each other, involving themselves in very transgressive sexual acts. There's a detachment, there's a numbness where we feel like their thought process doesn't really coordinate with the things that they are doing to themselves and to each other and to other people, and that produces a really, really uneasy feeling where it really does feel like insanity incarnate, where things of the mind and things of the body are not computing. And I think that that level of alienation is what Jelinek really gestures towards in a lot of her writing, certainly in as she does in The Piano Teacher. And of course, I think it also gestures towards that detachment from the context of history. There are characters here who are former Nazi officials who are still sort of performing atrocity and torture and overpowering those around them, but in a more quotidian context, in the household, torturing family members and so on and so forth. And it's that realization that the psychology, as we tend to think of it, like I said, as World War II, as having come to a resolution, the psychology explored here doesn't really compute with that, and it just continues that legacy of violence and torment, albeit in different ways. And that exploration is so magnificent. The way that she makes everything so disconcerting and ugly, and there's a wrongness in here that really feels pervasive, because everything that happens, like I said, because of it's so internal, because it's such a psychological novel, it's intrusive thoughts, and it's sort of private affairs that you don't really feel comfortable intruding upon or witnessing. It's sort of like tearing the doors open into an intimate scene between people that you really had no business looking at, and that you really don't want to look at. But her literature lives in that wrongness. Her literature lives in showing you the despicable things that people do in their minds and behind closed doors. and you know, that daringness, that boldness to go there is so unshakable. And I'm starting to find, because I've now read 3 of her works, and it's pervasive all throughout, I'm starting to find that she really delights in diving into all this grime and muck in a very uncompromised way. And it's just unbelievable. It's just unbelievable how, you know, this post-war novel sort of shows that in the quotidian sense, in the sort of more microscopic sense of city affairs, of family affairs, that brutal violence and psychological disconnect continues to exist, and maybe becomes even more monstrous now because of how integrated it is into quotidian and domestic affairs. It almost feels like, you know, in this context of you know, having become so enmeshed into everyday culture, it feels like it's a violence and it's a monstrosity that is never going to be scrubbed off. And that is a really scary fucking thought. So I feel like Jelinek is going to keep popping up on this series, because she really gets at that state of the human condition that says everything's fucked, and then she puts this cute little title on it, and it's like, you you demented woman, I love you. This is incredible. You know, if you can stomach and if you can vibe with that kind of more abstract psychological affair, Jelinek is absolutely for you. All right, my next entry into this list is something completely weird. And that is 1998's A Crackup at the Race Riots by Harmony Korine. Now this is it's a novel. It's called a novel, I think, by Korine himself, but it's hardly a kind of novel that you might be used to. There's really no continuous plot, and it's not really a collection of, you know, separate vignettes. It's not really a collection of poetry or anything like that. It's just more, the best I can describe it is a collection of clutter, of absent-minded sort of disjointed thoughts. Even the format of it sort of reflects that. You know, we have compilations of lists, we have random ramblings of whatever, we have certain segments that are just suicide notes, like suicide note number 1, number 2, number 3. We have random encounters being described, we have random notes, offhand thoughts, all manner of things. It's just clutter that is compiled into a book, into a singular experience. Now this is kind of a strange thing, because it's not really disturbing in the sense that these other ones are, where, you know, it's the story or it's the kind of style that make a work disturbing. What makes this uneasy for me is the kind of, you know, the dissonance of it, the clutter of it, is that it feels so quotidian. You know, it's kind of like scraps of paper that were just ill-formed into a book. And the scenes, the sort of arresting scenes that are described throughout, they feel so kind of mundane and quotidian almost. You know, it's just kind of like an offhand thought. Like I said, it's just a brief description of something that happens. You know, for example, there's a moment here where somebody says, you know, I ate. There's a page where it just says, I ate a bunch of diet powder to lose weight, but I ate so much of it that I gained weight instead. And that's it. And it's kind of humorous like that. It definitely. But I think that humor definitely does kind of belong in the disturbing as well, because there are things that provoke a kind of nervous laughter because of how weird or out of left field or bizarre that they are. And, you know, the bizarre elements are definitely disconcerting, but they're also humorous because of you know, the juxtaposition that they have with normalcy. There's something very odd and sort of outsider art about this, and about anything that Harmony Korine makes. Like, you know, his film Gummo, for example, is a good example of something that can be humorous because of how weird it is, but that doesn't shake the fact that it's also very off-putting and grotesque. And we have, you know, the same things here. You know, the book, like I said, lives wholly in the mundane and the quotidian, but my approach to this, you know, is that so do our darkest experiences in a way. And I think that this really sort of retrieves dark and disturbing life experiences from, you know, this veneer of being, an otherworldly kind of elevated experience for the human condition. Like as we tend to see like in film or in novels, disturbing things like sexual assault, like a racist encounter, are treated as these momentous, life-changing events. But I think that what works about a Crackup at the race riots is that it makes them sort of like these inconsequential moments that really lead to nowhere. But that is how we experience disturbing things in real life. There's no fancy framing for a car crash. There's no fancy framing and dramatic fanfare for something like a death or a murder or being hurt or being psychologically manipulated or falling into a hate crime or something like that. It just kind of just sort of happens. And I think that this book is just mostly about reaction, about processing, about recounting things, in the way that in real life we experience them. And I think that sort of retrieval from this veneer of disturbing happenings being kind of like a religious experience or something like that, retrieves them and brings them into scraps of paragraphs, into lists, into mere suggestions, mere reactions to disturbing subject matter. And I think that kind of makes them feel more real. There's the sadness of it, the exploration of racial discrimination, the unease. All of it is very muted in here. It's just kind of described very clinically and briefly, but that makes them sort of resonate the most. Because that is kind of like the ecosystem, the overwhelming ecosystem we live in, where so many things are happening to us at once, and it feels real. And there's a proximity, like I said, to like you're, because it doesn't feel like a book, because that veneer of it being art is sort of broken down. We're not reading a novel, we're reading sort of like the first-hand scraps that somebody left behind or something like that, like a compilation of documents that belong to somebody or something like that. When we break that down and we feel more of a closeness to the really unsavory things that are described in here, that makes it all the more compelling. And so I think that this is disturbing in a very unique, very bizarre, very humorous, but also kind of very heartful and sincere way. And that's what I really enjoyed about it most of all. All right, up next I'm going to talk about a horror paperback. And I don't really get to cover a lot of those on this list, just because I feel like horror doesn't really tend to be at the level of disturbing as some of these other non-genre works that we've covered so far. But this one definitely deserves a spot. And that is Penance by Rick R. Reed, which was first published in 1992. This is part of the Del Abyss line. And it is a story about a serial killer who goes on the hunt in the streets of Chicago, picking up child sex workers and sort of taking out his own frustrations because of his pedophilic sexual attractions. He sort of disconnects himself from his predatory actions, and instead he blames the children for enticing him, for turning him on, and then he ends up killing them. Now, of course, that subject matter is probably more than enough for a lot of you to find this deeply unsettling and disturbing. And there's a brutality here that is very sort of frankly told. It doesn't hold back when it comes to the descriptions of these child murders, but it also doesn't hold back in describing to you that line of like child sexual exploitation, like the child sex work that goes on in the streets of Chicago, of course, which is a very real thing that continues to happen. It's a very real social ill, and I sort of appreciate from a certain angle that it doesn't hold back. It doesn't sugarcoat it. It doesn't make it seem any less monstrous than it really is. And then, of course, when the murders happen, that does tend to feel a little bit exploitative, just because for genre thrills it piles on the gore and the buckets of blood and the torture and so forth. But there is an aspect of this book that I found incredibly unsettling, and that is that there are descriptions of child sex workers engaging in sexual acts with clients or with the killer, or being sexually abused by the killer, and the way that these are sort of described with a kind of indulgence of detail. It almost feels pornographic in its honest portrayal of child sex work, of child sexual exploitation. But there's a flimsy line there between, is this being displayed like that to be frank about the reality of the situation that a lot of children face, kind of in a condemnation that such monstrosity exists. But there's another angle of it, because of the indulgence and overly sort of pornographic context of it. I'm like, or, is there some kind of titillation that is also intended? And that flimsy line, between titillation and condemnation of these acts feels very dangerously thin and off-putting. And that is something that I was unable to shake off the more I read this, just because of how it goes so much into detail about it in a way that makes you go, okay, there's really no need to be that graphic. At a certain point, you kind of get it, but then you're like, well, the relentlessness is part of detailing the abuse that these children face, because it doesn't stop. It's just piled on more and more, and the suffering, there's no pause button on it. So it's a very interesting exploration, of course, of sexual deviancy, sexual addiction, sexual attraction of a predatory and monstrous kind. Like I said, feels frank, feels sincere. And there's also another angle to it, where the hero, one of the adult figures that sort of involves himself in trying to save children from these killers, is a priest who is also sexually attracted to children, is also a pedophile, and the kind of displays this fragility of goodwill. Do you feel like is this man being heroic because he really cares about the children? Or is he being heroic because he is also predatory and he wants to falsely make the children feel that they are safe with him? There's that exploration of how like predatory and heroic behaviors sort of intermingle, because a big part of the game that predators play with children is making them feel safe, making them feel that they're wanted, like they're being protected, like they can count on the predator to look over them, and that exploration of that dynamic in there is also very unsettling. So many very compelling points that are made here in what's otherwise just a kind of throwaway horror crime novel, but it really sort of digs its fingers into this dark subject matter that not many would dare explore. And it does it unflinchingly. It lays it all bare, and it kind of leaves it up to you to make your mind of, what is this narrative about? These characters that are so predatory and monsters, like, what are we supposed to feel for them? And when a book throws your mind every which way like that, I think it is obviously a very successful example of disturbing, unsettling, and unsavory literature. So for those reasons, although it did feel kind of exploitative, and sort of needlessly so, not really impactful, just kind of gross, I did have some conflicts with the novel, but overall I feel that the threads of societal decay, societal unease, and predating on children, all of that was just too compelling for me to not include it, and it did stay with me quite a few days after I read it. So if you're interested in exploring any of that, really sort of seeing a frank portrayal of all of that, this definitely felt like an important book, or a book that starts an important conversation at the very least. And then finally, for my fifth entry, I'm going to be talking about a book that I read last month, and that is most likely going to end up being one of my favorite reads of this year, and that was The Maimed by Herman Ungar, first published in the year 1923. Now, in this book, we follow the character of Franz, who is this man who we understand has some kind of mental illness, which many have described as being Asperger's, and his sort of day-to-day struggles with being exploited, with being ridiculed, with being taken advantage of, his own inner frustrations, with dealing with his misogynistic impulses, his hatred towards women, his resentment towards people, his increasing paranoia that people are out to get him. And it is just basically a 200-page exploration of all of the evils that sort of inflict damage upon this single figure's psychology, and the way that sort of innocence and naivety just sort of becomes these grounds for people to enact their worst evils. Now, if I said that Jelinek's novel sort of feels like an exploration of the legacy of World War II and how its monstrosity still festers, this feels like an exploration of the monstrosity that led up to that point. It really sort of eschews in all of that dark psychology of exploitation and dehumanization that sort of carried over into that monstrous conflict. You know, it's a book about frigid and harmful people, and that's all it is. And it is told in this very kind of delirious, hallucinatory way that makes it just sort of grip you and dive fully into the psychology of this main character and all of the ills and all of the horrors that sort of plague his day-to-day life. You know, it's a mental illness and victimhood are the central themes here. And they're described in a way that really feels, like I said, personal and debilitating and delirious, and kind of makes you, really places you in that perspective of helplessness, unlike anything that I have ever read. You know, because you feel where powerlessness comes from, and you also feel where depravity of a sexual but also just violent nature comes from, and the way that certain circumstances sort of allow it to worsen and grow within people and within social interactions. And it's really quite a thing to behold. And you know, something that is central to this is that France, you know, is this very unassuming person, very powerless person. You know, the way that this sort of the smallness of his psychology and the smallness of his body is explored, it kind of really places you in that physicality as well, and something that feels very kind of Kafka-esque. Hermann Ungar has been widely compared to Kafka's own work in the way that, you know, impotence, in the way that being unable to fend for yourself really aggrandizes the horrors around you, and makes you feel that reality itself is in kind of peril. The way that this poor man's limited perception of the world due to his psychology is constantly being afflicted by violence, you really feel like there's an ending always sort of looming. There you know, there's a danger that feels so prescient and monstrous, and you know, it really makes you consider how, you know, the world, how society is sort of built in a way to really overpower and to really destroy, you know, the people that are most vulnerable and that lack any kind of protection or consideration, that make it easy for others to make them victims. That is what's explored here in The Maimed, and it is done in such a brutal way, and the psychological angle to it again is what really gets you the disquieting aspects of being unable to escape your own weakness, and you know, how that weakness makes you a target. It's just unshakable. It was really quite upsetting, and I read this in one sitting, and I think that it is kind of meant to be read that way because like I said, it's just like this plunge into this episodic weakness of the mind. It just worsens and worsens and leaves off, and well, I won't spoil it, but yeah, it's quite something. It is definitely a novel that sort of shows you know, an evil that in a historical context would sort of hone in on the kind of vulnerability that Unger was writing about here. So yeah, vulnerability, victimhood, and just really awful, sick people. And there you go. Those are all the entries. This is going to be a long video. But all the same, if you stuck around, thank you so much. I hope your reading list has engorged beyond belief. I hope you came away with many things to check out or many things to avoid also. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much, as always, to all of my supporters over on Patreon who make this kind of debauchery and monstrous conversation possible. I hope that the little sloth helped. If you felt scared, if you felt uneasy, maybe not. I don't know. I'm just kidding. But yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Like I said, this series has really turned into something quite amazing. These are my favorite videos to make. Like I said, this is the kind of conversation that I always look forward to expanding and keeping going. And it really means a lot that this is, you know, such a well-received series, and you know, that I've carved out a kind of small but persistent space in which we can always come and talk about fucked up books, because, you know, God knows we need to air out all of those maladies now and then. So again, thank you so much for watching. If you have any suggestions for disturbing works, leave them down in the comments, and if I haven't talked about them before, they're more than likely going to be discussed in the next installment, whenever that comes. And yes, there will be a next installment, most definitely. There is no end in sight to all of the fucked up books that we can cover on here. So yeah, I hope you're all well. Continue to stay safe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.